The old cantina on Nexus Prime smelled like engine oil and alien sweat. Dark corners held creatures from dozens of worlds, all drinking and talking in low voices. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across metal tables and worn floors. In the farthest corner sat Commander Zethkar, his 6 legs folded beneath him as he hunched over a glass of blue liquid. Zethkar's chitinous shell bore deep scars from battles fought across the galaxy. His 4 eyes, each the size of a human fist, glowed with a dull orange light in the darkness. His mandibles clicked softly as he drank, a nervous habit he had picked up after the war. The other patrons gave him space. Everyone knew what those scars meant. 3 young Catherian soldiers approached his table. Their shells were bright and unmarked, their eyes clear and eager. The leader, Sub-Commander Vraktel, cleared his throat with a chittering sound. "Commander." "Zethkar, sir," Vraktel said, his voice respectful but excited. "We heard you served in the Great War. We were hoping you might share some stories with us." Zethkar's 4 eyes turned toward the young soldiers. He studied them for a long moment, taking in their clean uniforms and bright expressions. They had no idea what they were asking for. "Stories," he repeated, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "You want stories?" "Yes, sir," one of the other soldiers said eagerly. "We're being deployed to the Outer Rim next month. They say we might work with human units. We want to know what they're really like." Zethkar's mandibles clicked faster. He took another long drink from his glass, emptying it completely. The blue liquid burned as it went down, but it helped quiet the memories that were already stirring in his mind. "Human units," he said slowly. "You want to know about humans." The 3 young soldiers exchanged glances. They pulled out chairs and sat down at his table without being invited. Vraktel signaled the bartender for another round of drinks. "Everyone says they're different," Vraktel explained. "The other species talk about them in whispers. Some say they're monsters. Others say they're heroes. We just want to know the truth." Zethkar watched the bartender, a slug-like creature from the Gamma sector, slide a fresh glass across the table to him. The old commander picked it up with one of his smaller arms and took a careful sip. "The truth," he said finally. "The truth is that humans are both monsters and heroes, sometimes at the same time, sometimes in the same person." The young soldiers leaned forward, their eyes bright with curiosity. Zethkar looked at each of them in turn, remembering when he had been just as eager, just as innocent. "I first encountered humans 5 years ago," he began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a storyteller, "during the Battle of Kepler Station. We were part of the Coalition fleet, tasked with taking the station from rebel forces. Intelligence told us it would be simple. The rebels were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from supply lines." He paused to take another drink, letting the memory surface fully before continuing. "What intelligence didn't tell us was that the rebel commander was human. Captain Jake Morrison, commanding a ship called the UES Defiance. When our fleet arrived, Morrison had exactly 12 ships against our 120. "Those are terrible odds," one of the young soldiers said. "Indeed," Zethkar agreed. "Any reasonable commander would have surrendered immediately. Save the crews, negotiate terms, preserve resources for future battles. This is how civilized species conduct warfare." His 4 eyes grew distant as he remembered that day. Morrison did not surrender. When our admiral sent the standard surrender demand, Morrison's response was broadcast on all frequencies so every ship in both fleets could hear it. Zethkar's voice changed slightly, taking on what might have been an impression of a human accent. He said, "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but we're going to have to decline. See, this station has 40,000 civilians on it, and they're counting on us to keep them safe. So here's our counteroffer. Turn around and go home, and we won't have to embarrass you in front of your entire fleet." The young soldiers made chittering sounds of disbelief. 40,000 against 12 ships, Vraktel said. "That's insane." "That's what we thought too," Zethkar continued. "Our admiral was so amused that he decided to make an example of the humans. He ordered a full frontal assault, expecting to crush them in minutes." The old commander's mandibles clicked rapidly now. The nervous habit becoming more pronounced as the memory intensified. The battle began normally enough. Our ships moved into standard attack formation. The human ships spread out using the station's defensive platforms for cover. For the first few minutes, it looked like any other battle. He took another drink, longer this time. Then Morrison did something that changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. His ship, the Defiance, broke formation and charged directly at our flagship. Not firing weapons, not maneuvering for tactical advantage, just a straight line at maximum speed. A ramming attack? Vrachtel asked. But that's suicide. Exactly, Sethkar said. Our admiral couldn't believe it either. He ordered evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. The Defiance struck our flagship amidships at nearly full velocity. The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them as other patrons began listening to the story. Both ships were destroyed instantly. 2,000 coalition crew members died, along with Morrison and his entire crew of 300 humans. In a single moment, one small human ship had eliminated our command vessel and our most experienced admiral. Zethkar's eyes dimmed as he continued, but that wasn't the end of it. The remaining human ships immediately coordinated their attack without any apparent communication delay. It was as if they had been expecting Morrison's sacrifice and had already planned their response. How is that possible? One of the younger soldiers asked. We couldn't understand it either, Zethkar replied. Later, we learned that human military doctrine includes something they call succession planning. Every officer trains to assume command at a moment's notice. When Morrison died, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, immediately took control of the fleet. He finished his second drink and gestured for another. Martinez continued Morrison's strategy. She ordered 2 more ramming attacks while the remaining ships provided cover fire. Within 20 minutes, we had lost 4 of our largest ships to suicidal human tactics. The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were hearing. Our remaining commanders panicked, Zethkar continued. They had never faced an enemy willing to trade ship for ship, life for life, with no regard for survival. We retreated, but not before losing nearly half our fleet. But they lost everything, Vrachtel protested. All 12 ships were destroyed. Yes, Zethkar agreed. Every human ship was lost. Martinez died when her vessel exploded, taking out our 3rd flagship. Not a single human crew member survived. The battle. He paused, letting this sink in. But Kepler Station remained in rebel hands. 40,000 civilians were safe, and word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy faster than our official reports could suppress it. The old commander's voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. That was when we first understood that humans don't fight wars the way the rest of us do. For them, victory isn't about preserving resources or maintaining strategic advantage. Victory is about protecting what they value regardless of the cost to themselves. One of the young soldiers shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's just one battle, sir. Surely they can't all fight that way. Zethkar's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. Oh, young Vrachtel, he said softly. That was just the beginning. The Battle of Kepler Station was nothing compared to what came later. He raised his fresh glass in a mock toast. You want to know about humans? Then settle in. We have a long night ahead of us and many more stories to tell. The 3 young soldiers exchanged nervous glances but remained seated. Around them, the cantina had grown almost silent as other patrons strained to hear the war veteran's words. Everyone wanted to understand the species that had changed galactic warfare forever. Zethkar took a long drink and began to speak again, his voice carrying the weight of memories that would never leave him. Zethkar finished his 3rd drink and set the glass down with a soft clink. The cantina had grown even quieter around them. Other aliens had moved closer to their table, pretending to mind their own business while clearly listening to every word. The old commander's 4 eyes swept across the gathered crowd before returning to the 3 young soldiers. After Kepler Station, the coalition thought we understood human tactics, he continued. We prepared for more suicide attacks. We developed countermeasures, changed our formations, reinforced our flagship armor. We thought we were ready for them. His mandibles clicked softly as he shook his head. We were wrong. Humans don't repeat the same strategy twice. They adapt, evolve, surprise you when you least expect it. The next major engagement taught us that humans fight with more than just ships and weapons, they fight with their minds. Fraktel leaned forward eagerly. What happened? The siege of colony world Tertius, Zethkar said. A beautiful planet with crystal cities and floating gardens. The colonists there had declared independence from the Galactic Council. We were sent to restore order with a force of 50,000 troops. He gestured for another drink, his movements becoming slightly unsteady. The blue liquid was strong, but the memories were stronger. The colony had maybe 5,000 defenders, mostly civilian militia with basic training. Our generals expected to take the planet in 3 days. Instead, we spent 4 months in hell. The old commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered. The humans had sent military advisors to help train the colonial defense force. Only 12 humans, led by a Marine, sergeant named Lisa Carter. 12 humans against our entire army. One of the young soldiers made a scoffing sound. 12 humans couldn't possibly make that much difference. Zethkar's 4 eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made the young soldier shrink back. That's what we thought too, he said quietly. Sergeant Carter proved us wrong in ways we never imagined. He took a long drink before continuing. The first week went as expected. We landed our troops, established a beachhead, began our advance toward the capital city. The colonial forces fell back according to standard defensive doctrine. Everything seemed normal. His voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. Then strange things began happening. Our supply convoys started disappearing. Not destroyed, just gone. Trucks full of food and ammunition would leave our base camps and never arrive at their destinations. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace of what happened to them. Ambushes? Fraktel asked. We thought so at first, Zethkar replied, but there were no signs of battle. No weapon discharge residue, no blood, nothing. It was as if the convoys had simply vanished into thin air. He paused, letting the mystery sink in. After losing a dozen supply runs, our commanders ordered full escort details for every convoy. Armed vehicles, air support, the works. The convoys still disappeared. The aliens around their table had stopped pretending not to listen. Everyone was focused on Zethkar's words. Finally, one of our reconnaissance teams found the answer. Hidden in a canyon system 20 kilometers from the nearest road, they discovered a massive underground storage facility. All our missing supplies were there, along with something else. Zethkar's mandibles spread in what might have been admiration. Sergeant Carter had organized the colonists into what humans call guerrilla warfare units. Small teams that would intercept our convoys, disable the crews with non-lethal weapons, and steal everything. But instead of destroying what they couldn't use, they were redistributing it to civilian populations across the planet. That's impossible, one of the young soldiers protested. Our crews were trained soldiers. How could civilians overpower them? Because humans taught them to think differently about combat, Zethkar explained. Instead of fighting our soldiers, directly they attacked when our people were most vulnerable. During rest stops while refueling, when guards were changing shifts, they used psychology against us. He took another drink, his movements becoming more deliberate. But that was just the beginning. Carter began implementing what she called psychological warfare. Every night, speakers hidden around our camps would play sounds. Human music, crying children, recordings of battles from other worlds. None of it was loud enough to prevent sleep, but it was constant, always there in the background. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. After 2 weeks of this, our soldiers began showing signs of stress. They jumped at shadows, argued with each other, made mistakes during routine operations. Our medics had never seen anything like it. Zethkar's voice took on a tone of grudging respect. Then Carter escalated. She started leaving messages for our commanders. Not threats or demands, just simple statements written in perfect coalition standard and left where our patrols would find them. What kind of messages? Fraktel asked. Things like your soldiers look tired today, or the weather is nice for flying, but your pilots seem nervous. Personal observations that proved the humans were watching everything we did, even when we thought we were safe. The old commander's eyes grew darker. The psychological pressure began breaking down our command structure. Officers started doubting their own decisions, second-guessing routine orders. Some requested transfers off-world rather than continue the campaign. He finished his fourth drink and immediately signaled for another. But Carter's masterpiece came. During the third month, she had been studying our battle reports, learning how we thought, how we made decisions. Then she started predicting our movements. Predicting them how? One of the soldiers asked. She would leave messages telling us exactly what we were going to do before we did it. Tomorrow you will send a patrol to Grid Section 7. They will find nothing because we are not there. The day after, you will try to cut off our supply lines by blocking the mountain passes. This will also fail because we do not use those routes. Zethkar's mandibles clicked rapidly. At first, our commanders thought it was coincidence or lucky. Guessing. But Carter was right every time. She predicted our troop movements, our supply schedules, even which units would be rotated back to base for rest. The tension in the cantina was thick enough to cut. Every alien present was hanging on the war veteran's words. How could she know? Fractel whispered. Because humans study their enemies, Zethkar replied. Not just their weapons and tactics, but their psychology, their culture, their way of thinking. Carter had figured out that coalition military doctrine follows predictable patterns. We do things the same way because that's how we were trained. He took a long drink from his fresh glass. But humans don't think in patterns. They adapt, improvise, change their methods constantly. While we were trying to fight a conventional war, Carter was fighting 20 different wars at once. The old commander's voice grew quiet and intense. The breaking point came during the fourth month. Our forces had been reduced by 60%, not from battle casualties but from nervous breakdowns and transfer requests. The colonial defenders, meanwhile, seemed to be getting stronger and more confident every day. He paused, studying the faces of the young soldiers. That's when Sergeant Carter made her final move. She walked into our main base camp, alone and unarmed, carrying a white flag of truce. The aliens around the table gasped in surprise. She requested a meeting with our commanding general. When he agreed, she sat down across from him and said something that ended the siege immediately. What did she say? Fractel asked breathlessly. Zethkar's four eyes glowed with remembered amazement. She said, General, your soldiers are brave and well-trained, but they're fighting the wrong war. This isn't about territory or politics anymore. This is about proving that ordinary people can protect their homes when they have something worth fighting for. Your troops know this, even if you don't. That's why they're breaking down. They realize they're not liberators or peacekeepers. They're invaders trying to take away something precious from people who won't give up. The cantina was dead silent. Then she made an offer. She would arrange safe passage off-world for all coalition forces if we agreed to recognize colonial independence. No more fighting, no more casualties on either side. Zethkar finished his drink in one long swallow. Our general accepted immediately, not because he was defeated militarily, but because he realized that Sergeant Carter was right. We weren't fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting an entire population that refused to give up. He looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. That was the day I learned that humans don't just fight with weapons and tactics. They fight with ideas, with conviction, with the absolute certainty that some things are worth any sacrifice. The old commander stood up slowly, his movements careful but determined. And that young one's was still not the worst of it. The real horror was yet to come. Zethkar sat back down heavily, his 6 legs folding beneath him with practiced ease. The cantina around them had grown completely silent. Even the usual background noise of conversations and clinking glasses had stopped. Every alien in the place was watching the old war veteran, waiting for him to continue his story. The 3 young soldiers looked nervous now. The eager excitement in their eyes had been replaced by something else. Fear, perhaps, or maybe just the beginning of understanding. Zethkar noticed their change in mood and nodded slowly. You're starting to see it now, he said quietly. The thing that took me 3 years of war to understand. Humans don't fight the way we do. They don't think the way we do. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy the galaxy has ever known. He gestured for another drink. though his movements were becoming less steady. The blue liquid was strong, but it helped quiet the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. The siege of Proxima 7 was where everything changed, he continued. Not just for me, but for the entire war. It was where the galaxy learned what humans are truly capable of when they have nothing left to lose. Fraktel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What made that battle different? Zethkar's 4 eyes grew distant as he remembered. Proxima 7 was a human colony world. 2 million civilians, mostly farmers and miners. When the war escalated, the Coalition decided to make an example of them. Show other human worlds what happened to those who resisted. He took a long drink before continuing. We sent a massive force. 500,000 troops from 12 different species. The humans had maybe 50,000 defenders, mostly planetary militia with basic training. Our generals expected to take the planet in 2 weeks. The old commander's mandibles clicked softly. The human commander was General Patricia Hayes. She had been a teacher before the war started, can you believe that? A teacher who became one of the most feared military leaders in galactic history. A teacher? One of the young soldiers asked in disbelief. That's right, Zethkar replied. But Hayes understood something our generals didn't. She knew she couldn't win a conventional battle against our forces, so she decided not to fight one. He paused, letting his words sink in. Instead of trying to defend fixed positions or protect infrastructure, Hayes ordered her people to destroy everything of value on the planet. Food storage facilities, power plants, transportation networks, communication arrays. If the Coalition wanted Proxima 7, they would inherit a dead world. The aliens around their table exchanged shocked glances. This went against every principle of civilized warfare. But that wasn't the worst part, Zethkar continued. Hayes also convinced the civilian population to help. Not just the able-bodied adults, but everyone. Old people, teenagers, even children who could barely walk. She turned an entire planet into a weapon. His voice grew quieter, more intense. When our forces landed, we found a world at war with itself. Every building had been rigged with explosives. Every road was mined. Every water source had been poisoned. The humans had literally scorched their own earth to deny it to us. He took another drink, his hands shaking slightly. But Hayes wasn't done. She had divided her 50,000 defenders into cells of 10 to 20 people each. No central command, no fixed bases, no supply lines we could cut. Each cell operated independently, striking at our forces and then disappearing into the civilian population. Zethkar's eyes grew darker as the memories intensified. We couldn't tell the difference between combatants and non-combatants because there was no difference. A farmer would offer to sell us food, then detonate a bomb hidden in his cart. A child would ask for candy from our soldiers, then lead them into an ambush. An old woman would beg for medical help, then activate a signal that brought artillery fire down on our position. The cantina was so quiet that the only sound was the old commander's voice and the occasional clink of his glass against the table. Our forces began breaking down psychologically. How do you fight an enemy that looks like everyone else? How do you occupy a planet where every person is a potential threat? He looked directly at each of the young soldiers. We tried to establish safe zones, areas where civilians could go for protection. Hayes had anticipated this too. She sent volunteers into our safe zones, people who pretended to be grateful refugees. Once inside, they would sabotage our equipment, poison our food supplies, or simply gather intelligence about our operations. Fraktel's voice was barely a whisper. How could civilians do such things? Because Hayes had convinced them that this was their only chance, Zethkar replied. She told them that if they didn't fight now with everything they had, their children would grow up as slaves. She made them believe that death was preferable to defeat. The old commander's mandibles spread in a grim expression. And the terrible thing was, she was probably right. The Coalition had not planned to treat human colonies gently after the war. He finished his drink and immediately called for another. The siege lasted 6 months. 6 months of constant terror, where every shadow might hide an enemy, where every Friendly gesture might be a trap. Our forces went from 500,000 to fewer than 200,000. Not from battle casualties, but from nervous breakdowns and desertions. Zethkar's voice became barely audible. I was there for the final assault. Hayes had maybe 5,000 defenders left, scattered across the planet's capital city. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered. The odds were hopeless. He paused, staring into his glass. Instead, Hayes broadcast a message to every coalition unit on the planet. She said, "Soldiers of the coalition, you have fought bravely and with honor. You have families waiting for you at home, lives to return to when this war ends. We have nothing left but this moment. We ask you to remember that when you tell the story of what happens next." The aliens around the table leaned closer, sensing that the story was approaching its climax. Then she ordered her remaining forces to attack, Zethkar continued. Not a defensive action or a delaying tactic, a full assault against our main base, where we had concentrated most of our remaining troops. His 4 eyes glowed with remembered horror. 5,000 humans against 200,000 coalition soldiers. They came at us singing, "Can you believe that?" Singing human war songs as they charged into certain death. They had no vehicles, no heavy weapons, just small arms and improvised explosives and the absolute certainty that they were going to die. Zethkar's voice cracked slightly. But they kept coming. We cut them down by the hundreds, then by the thousands, but they kept coming. Teenagers barely old enough to fight, running straight at our positions with bombs strapped to their chests. Old people, who could barely walk, crawling forward with grenades in their hands. He took a shaky drink. The worst part was their faces. They weren't angry or afraid. They were peaceful, almost happy. Like they had found something worth dying for and were grateful for the opportunity. The cantina was dead silent. Even the bartender had stopped moving, frozen in place as he listened. The battle lasted 18 hours, Zethkar continued. When it was over, every single human defender was dead. Hayes herself died leading the final charge, killed by a sniper shot, while planting explosives under our command bunker. He looked up at the young soldiers, his eyes haunted. We had won. Proxima 7 was ours. But it felt like the greatest defeat in galactic history. Brechtel's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Because Hayes had achieved exactly what she wanted, Zethkar replied. Word of the siege spread throughout human space within days. The story of 2 million people who chose death over surrender became a rallying cry for every human world. He finished his drink and set the glass down with finality. But, more importantly, it broke something inside the coalition forces. Half our surviving troops requested immediate transfer off-world. The other half suffered from what human medics call combat stress reaction. They couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function as soldiers anymore. Zethkar's mandibles clicked, slowly. We had learned that humans don't just fight with weapons or tactics or even psychology. They fight with their souls. They're willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for something they believe in. He looked around the silent cantina. That's when the coalition leadership began to understand that this war couldn't be won through conventional means. You can defeat an army, but how do you defeat an idea? How do you conquer a people who view death as victory? The old commander stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. The answer, young ones, is that you don't. And that realization would shape everything that happened next. Zethkar remained standing for a moment, swaying slightly as the alcohol worked its way through his system. The cantina around them was completely silent. Every alien present was staring at him, waiting for him to continue. Some had tears in their eyes, though whether from fear or sorrow was impossible to tell. The old commander sat back down slowly, his 6 legs carefully positioning themselves beneath the table. His 4 eyes swept across the crowd before settling on the 3 young soldiers who had started this conversation hours ago. They looked different now. The eager excitement was gone, replaced by a deep understanding of what war really meant. You think that was the end of it, Zethkar said quietly. You think Proxima 7 was the worst thing humans could do to us, but you would be wrong. He gestured weakly for another drink, though his movements were becoming increasingly unsteady. The bartender hesitated for a moment, then slid another glass of blue liquid across the table. The real horror began after Proxima 7, the old commander continued. Not on the battlefield, but in our own minds. You see, prolonged exposure to human warfare tactics began affecting coalition forces in ways our medical teams had never seen before. Fractel leaned forward, his voice barely audible. What do you mean? I mean that fighting humans changes you, Zethkar replied. It gets inside your head and stays there. Our soldiers started experiencing what human medics call combat stress reaction, but it was different from anything in our medical databases. He took a long drink, his hands shaking slightly. Coalition forces had fought hundreds of wars over thousands of years. We knew how to handle battle stress, how to treat wounded minds as well as wounded bodies. But this was something new, something that didn't respond to traditional treatments. The old commander's voice grew distant as he remembered. Soldiers who had served for decades without problems suddenly couldn't sleep. They would wake up screaming about burning cities and singing humans. Others became unable to eat, claiming that food tasted like ash and blood. Some simply stopped talking altogether, staring at nothing for hours at a time. He paused, studying the faces around him. Our psychologist called it human combat syndrome. The symptoms appeared in any soldier who had fought against human forces for more than a few months. It didn't matter what species they were or how mentally strong they had been before. The humans got to everyone eventually. Zethkar's mandibles clicked rapidly, the nervous habit becoming more pronounced. I started showing symptoms myself after the liberation of Earth. That was supposed to be the final battle of the war, where we would crush human resistance once and for all. Instead, it became the moment when I truly understood what we were fighting. His 4 eyes grew darker as the memory surfaced. Earth was humanity's homeworld, their most heavily defended planet. 3 billion humans lived there, protected by their most advanced military technology and their best commanders. The coalition assembled its largest force ever. 2 million ships, 10 billion soldiers from every member species. He took another drink, longer this time. The human commander was Admiral Kate Foster. She had been fighting us for 4 years then winning battles she had no right to win, saving colonies that should have fallen. Our intelligence report said she was the most dangerous human military leader alive. Fractel's voice was barely a whisper. What made her so dangerous? She understood us, Zethkar replied simply. Foster had studied every coalition species, learned our strengths and weaknesses, figured out how to turn our own advantages against us. But more than that, she understood what this war had become. The old commander's voice grew quieter, more intense. When our fleet arrived at Earth, Foster broadcast a message on all frequencies, not to her own forces, but to us. She said, "Soldiers of the coalition, you have traveled far from your homes to fight a war that was supposed to end quickly. You have seen things that will haunt your dreams for the rest of your lives. You have lost friends and comrades to an enemy that refuses to surrender, refuses to break, refuses to accept defeat. I want you to know that we understand the price you have paid, and we are sorry for it." Zethkar paused, his eyes fixed on his glass. Then she said something that changed everything. "But we also want you to understand why we cannot stop fighting. This is not about territory or politics or military glory. This is about the right to exist as free beings in our own homes. When you look at your own families tonight, remember that we are fighting for the same thing you would fight for if someone tried to take them away." The cantina remained silent, but several aliens were visibly moved by the words. The battle for Earth lasted 3 months, Zethkar continued. 3 months of the most intense fighting the galaxy had ever seen. Foster's forces used every tactic we had encountered before, plus new ones we couldn't have imagined. He took another shaky drink. But the moment that broke me came near the end. Foster's flagship, the UES Vengeance, had been badly damaged in the fighting. Most of her weapons were gone, her engines were failing, and she had lost 80% of her crew. Zethkar's voice cracked slightly. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered or retreated. Foster ordered her ship to ram our super dreadnought, the largest ship in the coalition fleet. His 4 eyes grew distant with memory. I watched it happen through my tactical display. The vengeance came at us slowly, limping through space on damaged engines. Our guns tore pieces off her hull with every shot, but she kept coming. Foster was broadcasting on open channels, talking to her remaining crew. The old commander's mandibles clicked frantically. She wasn't giving orders or making speeches about duty and honor. She was talking to them like they were her children, telling them she was proud of them, that their families would remember their sacrifice, that they were about to do something that would save millions of human lives. Zethkar finished his drink in one long swallow. Then, just before impact, Foster manually activated her ship's reactor overload. The explosion destroyed the Vengeance, our super dreadnought, and 2 escort vessels. 4,000 Coalition crew members died along with Foster and her remaining people. He sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his empty glass. "But that wasn't what broke me," he said finally. "What broke me was watching the recording later, seeing Foster's face in those final moments. She wasn't angry or afraid or filled with hatred for us. She was at peace, happy even, like she had found exactly where she belonged." The young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had heard. "That's when I realized what human combat syndrome really was," Zethkar continued. "It wasn't fear or trauma or battle fatigue. It was the slow understanding that we were fighting people who had something we didn't, something worth dying for." His voice grew even quieter. "Coalition forces fight for duty, for orders, for the good of their species. Humans fight for love, for their families, their homes, their freedom to choose their own destiny. And when you're faced with that kind of conviction, that absolute certainty that death is preferable to surrender, it changes you." Zethkar looked around the silent cantina. Word of Foster's sacrifice spread through the Coalition fleet within hours. Morale collapsed completely. Entire units refused to continue fighting. Some species withdrew their forces from the war altogether, claiming they could no longer stomach the carnage. He gestured weakly for another drink, though the bartender pretended not to notice. The War Council met in emergency session 3 days after Earth fell, not to plan our next assault, but to discuss surrender terms. We had won every major battle, controlled most of human space, and reduced their military to scattered resistance groups. Zethkar's mandibles spread in a bitter smile. But we had also lost something more important than ships or soldiers. We had lost the will to continue fighting an enemy that viewed death as victory. The psychological cost of defeating humanity had become too high for civilized species to bear. He looked directly at the 3 young soldiers. That was when I understood the final truth about humans. They don't win wars by being stronger or smarter or better equipped than their enemies. They win by being willing to pay prices that no one else can imagine paying. The old commander stood up slowly, his movements careful but determined. "And that, young ones, is why you should pray you never have to face them as enemies. Because humans don't fight wars. They fight for love, and love makes them unstoppable." Zethkar swayed on his feet for a moment, then sat back down heavily. His 4 eyes were glazed with alcohol and memory, but his voice remained steady. The cantina around them was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted, as if the entire universe was waiting to hear the end of his story. The 3 young soldiers looked exhausted. They had come here looking for war stories and heroic tales. Instead, they had heard something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Vrachtel's bright shell had dulled to a sickly gray color, and his mandibles clicked constantly with nervous energy. "You want to know why I drink alone in cantinas across the galaxy?" Zethkar said quietly. "You want to know why I can't go home to my clutch family, why I can't sleep in a proper bed or eat civilized food? The answer lies in what happened during the final days of the war." He stared at his empty glass, making no move to order another drink. After Earth fell and the War Council decided to negotiate peace, there was still fighting happening on dozens of worlds. Small engagements mostly, as both sides tried to gain advantages before the treaty talks began. I was part of a boarding party sent to capture a human medical facility on a moon orbiting Jupiter. His voice grew distant as the memory surfaced. It was supposed to be a simple operation. The facility was lightly defended, mostly civilian staff. Our intelligence said there might be wounded human soldiers there, along with some important medical research. We were ordered to secure the facility and take prisoners for interrogation. Zethkar's mandibles clicked softly. What intelligence didn't tell us was that the facility was also treating wounded coalition soldiers, prisoners of war who had been captured during various battles and brought there for medical care. He paused, letting this sink in. When our boarding party breached the facility's airlocks, we expected to find human soldiers waiting to fight us. Instead, we found a human doctor named Angela Martinez, working frantically over an operating table. She didn't even look up when we entered the surgery room. The old commander's 4 eyes grew brighter as he remembered. Dr. Martinez was performing surgery on a Catherian soldier, one of our own people, badly wounded and unconscious on the table. She had been working for 6 hours straight to save his life, even though the facility was under direct attack from our ships. His voice became barely audible. My unit leader ordered the medical staff to surrender immediately. Dr. Martinez looked up from the operating table, her hands covered in blue Catherian blood, and said something I will never forget. Zethkar took a shaky breath. She said, "I understand you have orders to follow, but this soldier will die if I stop operating now. His name is Vector. He has 3 clutch brothers and a bonded mate waiting for him at home. If you give me 2 more hours, I can save his life. After that, I will surrender willingly and answer any questions you have." The cantina was so quiet that the sound of alien heartbeats was audible. My unit leader raised his weapon and told her that coalition prisoners were not her concern. Dr. Martinez nodded calmly and said, "You're right. They're not my concern. They're my responsibility. I took an oath to preserve life regardless of species, politics, or military affiliations. If you're going to shoot me, please do it quickly so another doctor can finish the surgery." Zethkar's mandibles spread in an expression of amazement that was still painful to remember. Then she turned back to the operating table and continued, working, completely ignoring the weapons pointed at her, focusing entirely on saving the life of an enemy soldier. He looked directly at Vraktel. "The wounded soldier was your clutch brother, young one, Vector of the 17th Combat Engineers. Dr. Martinez spent 14 hours rebuilding his thoracic cavity after a human artillery shell nearly killed him." Vraktel's eyes went wide with shock. His mandibles began clicking frantically as he processed this information. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Vector was treated at a coalition medical facility. The report said—" "The reports lied," Zethkar interrupted gently. "Many of the reports from that time were altered to hide embarrassing truths about human behavior. Your government didn't want its citizens to know that human doctors were saving coalition lives while their own people were dying." The old commander's voice grew softer, more thoughtful. Dr. Martinez finished the surgery successfully. Vector survived and was returned to coalition space 3 days later as part of a prisoner exchange. But before she would allow herself to be taken into custody, Dr. Martinez insisted on checking on 12 other coalition soldiers who were recovering in the facility. He paused, letting this sink in. 12 enemy soldiers, wounded in battle against her own people, brought to her facility because it was the only medical center in the system capable of treating severe trauma cases. She had been caring for them for weeks, using medicine and equipment that could have been used to save human lives instead. Zethkar's 4 eyes grew distant again. When I asked her why she would risk her life to help enemy soldiers, Dr. Martinez said something that changed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about humans. The aliens around the table leaned closer, sensing that the story was approaching its climax. She said, "War is about destroying your enemy's ability to fight. Medicine is about preserving life regardless of who that life belongs to. If I let politics determine who deserves medical care, then I stop being a doctor and become just another soldier. The universe has enough soldiers. It needs more doctors." Zethkar's voice cracked slightly. Then she asked me a question that I still can't answer. She said, "Commander, when this war ends and you go home to your family, how will you explain to your children what you fought for? Will you tell them you fought to conquer other worlds, or will you tell them you fought to protect the things you love?" He sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his hands. I couldn't answer her, because I realized that I didn't know anymore. Somewhere during years of fighting humans, the original purpose of the war had been lost. We weren't fighting for territory or resources or political ideology. We were fighting because we didn't know how to stop. The old commander looked around the silent cantina. Dr. Martinez was captured that day, but she was released as part of the peace negotiations 2 weeks later. The treaty was signed largely because enough coalition soldiers had experiences like mine. Encounters with humans who showed mercy when they had every reason for hatred, compassion when they should have shown cruelty. He stood up slowly, his movements careful but determined. The final irony was that humans didn't win the war through superior tactics or better weapons, or even their willingness to die for their beliefs. They won because they never stopped being human, even in the middle of hell. Zethkar reached into his uniform and pulled out a small object. It was a medical scanner, battered and worn but still functional. Dr. Martinez gave this to me before she was taken into custody. She said that every life saved was a victory against the darkness that war brings. She asked me to remember that when I went home. His mandibles clicked slowly as he put the scanner away. But I never went home, because I realized that fighting humans had changed me in ways I couldn't explain to my Clutch family. I had seen ordinary people do extraordinary things, not for glory or duty or political ideals, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The old commander looked at each of the young soldiers in turn. That's why I drink alone in cantinas across the galaxy. Because humans taught me that there are some things worth fighting for, and some things worth dying for, and some things worth living for. And once you understand that, you can never go back to the way things were before. He walked toward the cantina's exit, moving slowly but steadily. The war ended 5 years ago, he called back to them. Humans are now full members of the Galactic Alliance. They serve alongside former enemies in joint military units, sharing their medical knowledge and their tactical expertise with species that once tried to destroy them. Zethkar paused at the doorway and turned back one final time. Dr. Martinez is the Chief Medical Officer for Integrated Species Operations now. She works with soldiers from every coalition world, healing the wounds that war left behind, both physical and psychological. He looked directly at Vraktel. Your Clutch brother Vector serves as her chief of security. He volunteered for the position because he said he owed her a debt that could never be repaid. Saving a life, he told me, is the most human thing anyone can do. The old commander stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the station's corridors, leaving behind 3 young soldiers who would never think about war the same way again. In the silence that followed, a news feed began playing on the cantina's main screen. The headline read, Joint Human Catherian Medical Team Saves Thousands on Disaster-Struck Colony World. The image showed Dr. Angela Martinez working alongside alien doctors, treating victims regardless of their species. Just as she had done during the darkest days of the war, the universe, it seemed, did indeed need more doctors.